I woke up gasping, sweat streaming down my face as if I had been plunged into cold water. My heart raced out of rhythm, and a sense of terror enveloped me. The shadow of my nightmares was closer than ever, as if it had crossed the thin line between dream and reality. I sat up in bed, trying to catch my breath, while the images of what I had seen replayed in my mind. The dark silhouette danced among the shadows of my room, and I wondered if I would ever find peace. I got up, still trembling, and went to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a pale, tired face, my sunken eyes revealing the fatigue that had accumulated with each sleepless night. Just one more day, I thought as I washed my face, trying to brush away the remnants of the nightmare. The smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen drew me in, and despite my state, part of me longed for the familiar routine. At breakfast, my sister, Lily, was sitting at the table with an open book in front of her. She looked up, and I soon noticed the concern in her eyes. "Jake, you don't look well. What's happening with you?" she asked, her voice soft yet firm. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. I didn't want to worry my family any more than necessary. "I'm just tired, Lily. I didn't sleep well," I replied, forcing a smile that barely reached my lips. She frowned, clear sign that she wasn't convinced. "Tired? Or are you having those nightmares again?" she pressed. My heart raced at the mention of nightmares. It was as if she had struck a sensitive chord. "It's nothing, I promise," I said, trying to change the subject. But to my surprise, she continued, "I dreamed of the shadow again. It was calling me." Chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice faltering. Lily looked down as if remembering something. "It was like it wanted to show me something, Jake. Something important." I watched her, confused and intrigued. How was it possible that she had also dreamed of the same thing? "We should forget about this. It's just a dream," I said, trying to convince myself more than her. After breakfast, I needed fresh air. I found Ethan in the park, and seeing him brought a small sense of relief to my chest. He had always been my best friend, and perhaps his presence would help me sort out my thoughts. I approached him, and soon we started talking. "Hey Jake, you look a bit out of it. What's going on?" he asked with that familiar look of concern. Gradually, I began to share about the nightmares, about the shadow that seemed to haunt me, and how it was affecting my life. Ethan listened attentively, his eyes fixed on me as if he were absorbing every word. "This is serious, man. We need to investigate. There might be something in the history of the town that explains this," he suggested, the excitement in his voice becoming contagious. "Investigate? What do you suggest, Ethan?" I asked, unsure if I was ready to dive into something that could be even more terrifying. "Let's go to the library. There might be old books, records, anything that could help us understand what's going on," he replied, already moving toward the park's exit. I hesitated. The idea of exploring the town's past was daunting. The need for answers was stronger. "All right, let's go," I agreed, feeling a mix of fear and anticipation. So we began to walk, the shadow of my nightmares still dancing in my mind, but now accompanied by the determination to uncover what truly lurked in the darkness. The local library was a place I had always found comforting, but that day, atmosphere was charged with palpable tension. The large, dark wooden shelves, filled with dusty books, seemed to watch our every move. Ethan and I headed to a section that seemed to whisper ancient secret. "I think we need something deeper, something that explains this shadow," he said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "I agree," I replied, "but where do we start? We don't have much information about this town and its dark stories." He furrowed his brow and began to scan the shelves until he stopped in front of a thick book with a worn spine. "Look at this," he exclaimed, pulling the volume out. The title, Cults and Rituals of the Ancient Town of Hollow Creek, seemed promising. We sat down at a table in a secluded corner, and Ethan opened the book carefully, as if he were handling a sacred artifact. As he flipped through the pages, I could feel the tension rising between us, as if the library itself were warning us about what we were about to discover. "Here," he said, pointing to a disturbing illustration, an altar surrounded by hooded figures performing a ritual. "This looks like the shadow I see in my dreams. This is terrifying, Ethan." "What else does it say?" I asked, trying to hide the nervousness in my voice. He began reading aloud, his words echoing in the silence of the place. This cult worshipped a dark entity known as the Shadow of Truth. They say it fed on fears and traumas, and that the rituals performed were to keep the town safe, but at a cost. Cost? What cost? I pressed, taking a sip of the water I had brought. I knew the answer wouldn't be good, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. Ethan turned the page and continued. People disappeared during the rituals, and the cultists believed this was a necessary sacrifice. Without the sacrifices, the town would be doomed. With every word, my heart raced. Disappearances? Are you saying this could still be happening? He hesitated, looking at me seriously. Jake, it's possible that the shadow is manifesting because of something that's happening now. We need to find out if there are still followers of that cult. After a few hours of research, we decided it was time to talk to someone who could give us more information. An elderly resident of the town, known for his stories about the past, might be our best bet. Let's go to the square, I suggest. He usually hangs out there in the late afternoon. When we found the old man sitting on a bench, his distant gaze seemed lost in memories. Hi, Mr. Thompson, Ethan said, trying to catch his attention. The man turned slowly toward us, and a weary smile formed on his face. Ah, young ones, what brings you here? We're researching the history of Hollow Creek, especially about some disappearances that happened in the past, I said, feeling nervous. The old man frowned and looked around as if fearing someone might hear. Disappearances? That's something better left forgotten, boys. But sir, we need to know. Can you help us? Ethan insisted. The old man hesitated, but the curiosity on our faces seemed to convince him to share. The cult, they worshipped the shadow. Many believed that the town would be protected, but at a terrible cost. Many were never seen again. Some I knew myself. What happened to them? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me with a mixture of sadness and fear. They were taken. The last time I saw them, they were preparing for a ritual in the woods. I warned them, but they wouldn't listen. They believed they were chosen. Those words echoed in my mind as I tried to digest what he was saying. So, the shadow isn't just a nightmare? It's real? I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine. The old man nodded slowly. Yes, the shadow is real, and it is always lurking. At that moment, the feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance. I looked at Ethan, and we both knew that whatever we were facing was not just a matter of dreams. It was something deeper, more threatening. The sun was beginning to set, casting long and distorted shadows around us. Let's go home, I suggested, feeling that the atmosphere of the town had changed. Ethan agreed, but as we walked through the streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was following us, closer than ever. I woke up with a start, my heart racing, and darkness still dominated my room. Sweat trickled down my temple, and a sense of oppression filled the air. For a moment, I was paralyzed, listening to the silence, but I knew it was merely a prelude. The shadow of my nightmares was closer than ever. With effort, I got out of bed and walked to the window. I looked out at the deserted street, the shadows of the trees swaying gently in the wind. A chill ran down my spine. Jake, you're overreacting, I thought, trying to calm myself. But soon the memory of the whisper I had heard the night before returned to my mind, an indistinct sound that seemed to be calling me. What could it be? What did the shadow want from me? That morning, during breakfast, my sister Lily watched me with a worried expression. You don't look well, Jake. What's going on? The way she looked at me made my heart tighten. I wanted to protect her, but at the same time, couldn't hide what was happening. I'm just tired. It's all school stress, I replied quickly, trying to divert my gaze. But when Lily mentioned the dream she had with the shadow, my facade began to crumble. You dreamed about it too? Surprise was evident in my voice. Yes, Jake. It was a shadow, and it seemed alive. I couldn't move. It was as if it was watching me, she said, her voice trembling. What's happening to us? I tried to ignore the fear growing inside me, and sought solace in Ethan. Finding him in the park was a temporary relief. He had always been my safe harbor, and I needed someone to share the weight that was consuming me. Ethan, you won't believe the nightmares I've been having, began, my voice coming out quieter than I intended. He looked at me with curiosity. Tell me, what happened? With each word I spoke, Ethan's expression changed, reflecting the horror I felt. There's a shadow, and it feels real, and it's following me. Sometimes, I feel like it's watching me, as if it wants something from me. Ethan frowned. This is serious, Jake. We need to find out what's happening. Let's investigate the history of our town. There might be something that explains this. There was determination in his voice, and I admired his courage, but I also feared we might find. That night, the shadow that tormented me materialized in my room. The air was heavy, and for the first time, I heard a whisper. It was a strange, almost hypnotic melody. The words were incomprehensible. "What do you want?" asked, my voice trembling. The shadow didn't answer, but its presence seemed to intensify, as if it was preparing to pounce on me. Desperate, I went to my parents, but when I told them about the shadow, it just shook their heads and said, "It was just stress. Jake, you're just going through a phase. Don't worry about it," my mother said, concern in her eyes not translating into understanding. "But Mom, it's real. I'm not making this up," I pleaded, but the response was the same. Frustrated and alone, I knew I couldn't count on anyone except Ethan. His obsession was growing by the day, and instead of helping me distance myself from the shadow, he seemed drawn to the idea of communicating. "Jake, you don't understand. This is bigger than us. We need to know more about it, even if it means risking everything." His eyes shining with a mix of fear and excitement. "But Ethan, what if it's not safe? What if it hurts us?" I was terrified, but he seemed completely immersed in his own curiosity. "We need to know the truth, Jake. We can't live in fear," he retorted, and as he spoke, I realized that the shadow was not just a nightmare. It was a real threat, and it was getting closer. The atmosphere in the house was heavy, as if a storm was about to break at any moment. Lily, my younger sister, was no longer the same. Each day, her expression grew more distant, as if a shadow loomed over her too. I caught glimpses of her while trying to focus on my breakfast, but worry consumed me. The feeling that the shadow was closing in on all of us became more real by the day. "Jake, are you okay?" Lily's voice interrupted my thoughts. She looked at me with worried eyes, and I could see that, on some level, she felt the same way I did. The truth was, I was far from okay. How could I tell her that the shadow from my nightmares was approaching? "I'm just tired," I replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You know how it is, school and all. Tired or scared?" she asked, her frankness catching me off guard. "Just tired, really," I said, but a part of me wanted to scream, wanted to tell her about the whispers I heard in the darkest nights, about how the shadow seemed to feed off my fear. "I dreamed about the shadow again," she confessed, and my heart raced. "It was calling me, Jake. It was like it was telling me to go with it." "Don't worry about it, Lil," I said, trying to sound more confident than I really was. "They're just nightmares. You know they're not real." But deep down, I knew there was something more. Something dark that connected us to this presence. In the park, when I met Ethan, I couldn't help but share what I was going through. "Lily also dreamed about the shadow," I said, anxiety creeping into my voice. "This is serious," Ethan replied, his gaze lighting up with a mix of curiosity and concern. "We need to investigate more. If there's a connection between you two, then this could be bigger than we imagine." "Do you think there could be an explanation?" I asked, feeling hope flicker for a moment. "It's very possible. Let's go to the library. There may be something in the old books of the town that helps us understand this," he suggested, and I immediately agreed. The idea of finding answers gave me a little courage. In the library, the smell of aged paper and dust enveloped us as soon as we entered. Ethan delved into a book that spoke about the town's history and its ancient cult. "Look at this," he exclaimed, showing an illustration of an altar. "This cult worshipped a dark entity. It's possible that the shadow is related to this." But the information we found was only fragments, and as we spoke with an elderly resident who approached us, tension increased. He told us about disappearances that occurred decades ago, all linked to the cult's rituals. "These people disappeared after seeing the shadow," he said, his voice trembling. "They say it fed on their fears, and those who were taken were never seen again." Fear spread through me like a wave. "What happened to them?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. "We don't know. Some believe they're still out there somewhere, under the shadow's control," he replied, and I felt myself freeze. On the way home, anxiety was palpable. Sky darkened. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I looked back, but saw nothing, just the darkness beginning to engulf the street. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, noticing my uneasy glance. "It's just this strange feeling," I murmured, but the truth was that the shadow seemed closer than ever. Upon entering the house, the air felt heavy, and my mind struggled to process the horrors we were uncovering. That night, while trying to rest, the shadow made its presence felt once again, this time with a terrifying intensity. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that the fight was just beginning, and that somehow we needed to confront this before it consumed us all. The forest was shrouded in a dense, almost palpable fog that seemed to breathe with the surrounding darkness. The path leading us to the site of the disappearances was narrow and covered in dry leaves that crunched under our feet. Ethan walked ahead of me, his determination evident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were entering a territory we shouldn't explore. "Jake, we're almost there," Ethan said, looking back with a gleam of excitement in his eyes. "I think we're going to find something amazing." "Or something that should stay buried," I replied, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "I don't know if this is a good idea. What if the shadow is waiting for us? We need to understand what's happening. We can't just stand still while it chases us," he insisted, quickening his pace. We arrived at a clearing, and there, hidden beneath a mantle of moss and foliage, was the ancient altar. It was a structure of irregular stones, covered with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The air around us felt heavier, and the sensation of being watched intensified with each passing second. "Look at this, Jake," Ethan exclaimed, pointing at the drawings. "These symbols, they're the same ones I found in the book." "And if this is a warning?" I asked, gripping his arm. "Maybe we should go back." "Just one touch, just to see what happens," Ethan said, already crouching down toward the altar. Before I could protest, he touched the cold surface of the stone, and a tremor ran through the ground beneath our feet. The wind began to howl, and a dark shadow rose from the altar, slowly taking shape. It was the same shadow from my nightmares, now more real and threatening than ever. "Ethan, what have you done?" I yelled, backing away. I just wanted to understand." He seemed hypnotized, unable to pull away. The shadow materialized before us, its contours indistinct, as if made of smoke and darkness. I heard a whisper, a voice that wasn't human, but seemed to want to communicate. "Return me." With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed Ethan by the shirt. "We need to get out of here now." But he was frozen, his eyes fixed on the shadow. "Speaking, it wants something from us. It wants to attack us, Ethan. Let's go." I pulled him away from the altar, but the shadow lunged at us with unimaginable speed. The air turned cold, and I felt a deep foreboding that we were about to face something far more powerful than we could imagine. "Jake?" Ethan shouted, finally snapping out of his trance. He ran by my side, and together we sprinted through the forest, not daring to look back. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the shadow followed, like a hungry wolf after its prey. "This is your fault, you brought it," I yelled, my heart racing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, I didn't know this would happen," Ethan replied, breathless. Finally, we found a path back, and the shadow began to dissipate as we distanced ourselves from the altar. The tension in the air started to lift, but the feeling that the shadow had grown stronger still lingered over us. "We need to tell Lily," Ethan said, stopping to catch his breath. "She needs to know about this." "Yes, but first we need to understand what happened." "We can't let this happen again," I said, trying to regain clarity. As we moved away from the forest, the darkness seemed to follow us, like a memory that couldn't be ignored. The shadow was not just a manifestation of my fears. Now, it was part of something much larger, and I knew that the battle was only beginning. The nights had turned into a true torment. Every time I closed my eyes, the shadow became more vivid, more real. In a restless state of sleep, I saw it dancing on the walls of my room, its dark contours twisting and stretching in impossible ways. One night, while trying to rest, I was invaded by a series of terrifying images. Ancient rituals, distorted faces in worship, and a sense of despair that seemed to pulse through the air, as if the very atmosphere was charged with the pain of thousands of souls. I awoke from a nightmare with a scream caught in my throat, my body drenched in sweat. With every gasping breath, the shadow seemed to draw closer, as if it were feeding on my fear. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, even knowing there was no one there to hear. The only response was a deafening silence, and the feeling that something was about to happen. In the following days, my sanity began to fade. During breakfast, my sister Lily looked at me with concern. "Jake, you don't seem like yourself. What's happening?" She said this with the innocence of someone who still didn't understand the horror surrounding me. I tried to smile, but her expression told me that my mask was beginning to crack. "I'm just tired, Lil. A lot of work at school," I replied, trying to look away. But the truth was that the shadow wouldn't leave me in peace. That night, as I twisted in search of comfort among damp sheets, an idea began to take shape. The shadow was connected to something larger, something I couldn't fully understand. In the following days, my mind spun around the possibility that it was not just a manifestation of my fear, but rather an entity linked to my family. Something ancestral. I decided to search for clues. With Ethan's help, we went to the local library. The smell of old books and dust seemed promising. "If your family has any connection to this, Jake, we need to find out," Ethan said as he flipped through a dusty book. The title, almost illegible, was Cults and Rituals of the Ancient City. With every page Ethan turned, my heart raced. "Look at this," he said, pointing to an illustration of an altar. "This is all very strange, but it looks like there was an entity worshipped by a cult. What do you think this could mean?" "I don't know, but I need to know more about my family," I replied, the unease growing inside me. There might be something here that explains the shadow's presence. In the days that followed, I found an old diary of my grandfather hidden in a dusty box in the attic. The pages were yellowed, but the handwriting was clear. "The city is in danger," he had written. "The cult made a pact, and the sacrifice was necessary to protect us." My heart stopped. What did he mean by that? Could the shadow be a corrupted protective force for some reason? Called Ethan. "You need to come here now," I exclaimed. Minutes later, he was in my room, his eyes shining with curiosity. "What did you find?" "Look at this," I said, handing the diary to him. My grandfather was involved in something much bigger than I could ever imagine. He made a sacrifice. Ethan read aloud. "The sacrifice is the only way to keep the city safe." With every word, the tension increased. "Jake, this means that the shadow, maybe it isn't what we think. It could be a guardian, but something went wrong. I feel like we are close to uncovering this. The shadow is connected to our past, and we need to figure out how to undo what's been done." I murmured, the weight of the revelation beginning to suffocate me. "But how? What can we do? We need to understand the pact. If what your grandfather wrote is true, there might be a way to reverse this," Ethan replied, his determination beginning to shine. But as we spoke, the shadow seemed to stir in my mind, a grim reminder that time was running out. Tension between Ethan and me was becoming unbearable. Over the past few days, his obsession with investigating the cult and the shadow only grew, while I felt increasingly surrounded by a paralyzing fear. It was as if a thin line separated curiosity from despair, and I knew Ethan was about to cross it. "We need to stop, Ethan. This isn't a game," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The worry became palpable in every word. We were sitting in my room, surrounded by old books and notes he had made. The pages were filled with information about the cult that worshipped the dark entity, but each new discovery only seemed to fuel his obsession. "Jake, you don't understand. We're so close to uncovering the truth. What if this is the key to solving everything? Ending the shadow?" The intensity in his gaze was almost haunting. He got up, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "You can't just ignore this. Ethan, don't you see that this could end badly? Look at what's happened in the last few weeks. Lily is acting strangely, and I'm having nightmares that are becoming more vivid. The shadow isn't just an old story. It's real, and it's hunting us," I argued, desperately trying to make him understand the gravity of the situation. He hesitated, and for a moment I thought I might reach him. But soon, determination returned to his eyes. "I can't stop now. We have to go deeper. I feel that the answer is right in front of us, and if that means performing a ritual, then I will do it." "A ritual? Ethan, are you serious? What if it goes wrong? What will you do if the shadow really comes after us?" I raised my voice, frustration and fear intertwining within me. There's no guarantee this will work, and if it doesn't, could be the end. He looked at me with a mix of disdain and desperation. You're scared. I understand, but I can't just stand by while things get worse. You can't stop me from finding out the truth. Silence settled between us, heavy and laden with tension. I knew I wouldn't be able to convince him to give up. But I also couldn't let him go alone. Ethan, if you do this, I'm going after you. I can't allow you to face this alone. You don't have to do this, Jake. If I fail, you need to stay away. I don't want you to get hurt because of my choices, he said, but the firmness in his voice was beginning to waver. I can't stay out of it, Ethan. We've been friends forever, and that won't change because of a shadow or a cult. We'll go together. That way I can make sure you don't do anything impulsive. I insisted, and the truth was that I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to him. He sighed, his expression softening a bit. Then it's decided. We'll go together, but I need you to help me prepare. I don't know what we'll find. With that, we began to outline a plan. The idea of a ritual made me nervous, but a part of me also felt a growing adrenaline. It was as if we were about to open a door that should remain closed. But Ethan's curiosity dragged me along with him. In the following days, Ethan dedicated himself to preparing everything for the ritual. He drew strange symbols in a notebook, researching tirelessly about the cult's practices. Meanwhile, I tried to keep my mind occupied, but the feeling that we were about to cross a dangerous line consumed me. One night, while we reviewed the plans, Ethan looked at me with an intense gleam in his eyes. I feel like this is our only chance to truly understand the shadow. If we can comprehend what it wants, maybe we can free it. And what if the shadow doesn't want to be freed? Retorted, the unease swelling within me. What if it's more powerful than you imagine? We need to take the risk, Jake. This is the only way to end this nightmare, said, his determination unshakable. What I didn't know was that we were about to get lost in a labyrinth of mysteries and secrets that we couldn't even begin to comprehend. The line between curiosity and madness was about to blur, and I wondered if we would make it out of this journey without getting hurt even more. The air was heavy, almost electric, as I watched Ethan immersed in a deep trance. The candles around him flickered, casting dancing shadows on the trees surrounding us. The ritual he was about to perform sent chills down my spine. Ethan, you can't do this, I shouted, my voice choked with fear. But he didn't hear me. His eyes were glazed over, fixed on a point in space, as if he were in another world. The shadow had manifested more intensely, writhing in the shadows cast by the flames. I felt its presence, heavy and oppressive, as if it were about to consume everything around us. Ethan, stop this, I pleaded again, but he seemed deaf to my words. It was clear that obsession had taken him in an irrevocable way. Jake, I have to do this, he said, his voice trembling with a determination I had never seen before. I can control it. I can discover the truth. He gestured toward the makeshift altar, where strange symbols were traced in the earth. The tension in the air was palpable, and I knew that what we were about to do could be fatal. Then, as if answering Ethan's call, the shadow began to materialize more visibly, its dark form standing out against the candlelight. I remember feeling a biting cold, as if the very essence of darkness was sucking the warmth from the surroundings. My heart raced as I realized the shadow was approaching, contours becoming more defined. Ethan, you don't understand. We're not ready for this. My voice trembled with desperation. I understand more than you think, Jake. This shadow isn't an enemy. It's a part of us, of our history. He seemed genuinely convinced, but I couldn't see the logic in his words. All I felt was an insatiable hunger in the presence of that entity. Then, suddenly, Lily appeared between the trees, her eyes wide. What are you doing? She shouted, but her expression quickly turned to confusion. Ethan, you need to stop. This is dangerous. Ethan, you heard her. This isn't a game. I tried to reinforce, but he was so focused that he seemed not to hear. I can't stop now. I'm so close. He turned to Lily, as if her presence had awakened a new purpose in him. You don't understand, Lily. We have to uncover the truth about what happened to our family, to our town. She hesitated for a moment, looking between the two of us before shouting, Ethan, you don't know what you're invoking. The shadow isn't a friend. It's a threat. Her voice echoed through the trees, and for a brief moment the shadow hesitated, as if it were listening. Then, something extraordinary happened. The shadow hesitated upon hearing Lily's name, and I realized there was a deeper connection. "What do you know about this, Lily?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. She looked at us, her breathing quick and her gaze fixed on the shadow that danced between us. I've had dreams. Voices calling me. I don't know how, but I feel like it's connected to me. Air seemed to vibrate with the energy of her words, and the shadow in response began to writhe, almost as if it were in conflict. "Lily, this could be the key. If it's calling you, maybe you can." "I don't know how," she interrupted, her voice filled with despair. "But we need to stop this now." The shadow for a moment seemed to hesitate, as if weighing our intentions. The weight of the situation was unbearable, and I knew time was running out. It was as if the fate of all of us was at stake, and what happened next could change everything. The shadow loomed over us, an oppressive presence that seemed to listen to every word, every heartbeat. The atmosphere was charged with palpable tension, and as I prepared to confront this entity, a vision flashed in my mind. The shadow began to writhe, and in an instant, everything around us disappeared. I found myself in another place, in another time. The vision unfolded before me like a movie. I saw an ancestor of mine, a serious-looking man, surrounded by hooded figures in a dark ritual. The altar was filled with lit candles, their flames dancing frantically. I could feel the cold of the ancient night, the heavy silence, and the expectancy in the air. He was about to sacrifice something precious, something that could guarantee the safety of our town. Image drew closer, and I could see what was on the altar. A small, gleaming object, a jewel that emitted a soft light, but now seemed charged with dark energy. "Jake, look." Ethan's voice brought me back to reality. He was pale. The look of terror on his face reflected what I felt. "What was that? What is the shadow trying to show us?" I don't know, but it seems like it was trying to warn us," I replied, trying to organize the confusing thoughts still swirling in my mind. "I think what we saw is linked to a pact. A sacrifice was made to protect our town." The shadow pulsed around us, as if absorbing our conversation, processing the information. A sense of urgency washed over me. We need to understand what really happened. The shadow isn't just a threat. It has a story that needs to be unearthed. "And how are we going to do that?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide. "What is expected of us? What must we sacrifice?" I thought for a moment, the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. Maybe the sacrifice isn't just something physical. Could be that we have to face our own fears, understand what this shadow truly represents. Before I could continue, the shadow began to manifest even more, forming a nebulous figure that seemed to be watching me. The connection with my ancestor grew stronger, as if he were trying to communicate something to me. "Ethan, do you realize? The shadow is trying to show us that it is a protective force that has been corrupted. Whatever happened in the past, something went wrong. So, if the shadow is a protective force, how can we help it break free? What does this mean for us?" Ethan asked, voice almost a whisper. "We need to undo the pact," I said, the idea taking shape in my mind. "But for that, we need to find out how. What was sacrificed? What was lost? And more importantly, who are we in this story?" The shadow seemed to hesitate upon hearing my plea, the contours of its form becoming less defined, as if it were pondering the words I had just spoken. Part of me felt that we were getting closer to a truth that could free not only us but also it. What if the sacrifice is our own pain? Our own secret? Ethan suggested, his voice rising a pitch. What is expected of us goes beyond the physical. Perhaps we have to look within, confront what we have hidden. That might be the key to liberating it. The echoes of his words reverberated within me, and I realized that everything was interconnected. The shadow, my family past, cult, whatever had happened so long ago still echoed in our lives, and now it was us who needed to face this truth. "We need to act fast. The shadow is becoming stronger," I said, with renewed determination. "Let's find out what happened. What was sacrificed? We need to understand the connection between our family and this entity. Only then can we free it, and who knows, save the town." As the tension hung in the air, the smell of melted wax and the crackling of candles filled the space around us. We were three, but the atmosphere carried the weight of an army. I looked at Ethan, his face marked by determination and the obsession that grew every day. The shadow, a nebulous figure, seemed to pulse between us. Living entity, hungry for something we didn't fully understand. "We can't let this continue, Ethan," I said, almost pleading. "Don't you see what you're doing? This thing is taking over you." He turned to me, the fury in his eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Jake, you don't understand. This shadow, it's not just a curse. It's a legacy, something we need to control. If we don't do this, it will consume us." Lily, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Ethan, you can't control something you don't understand. Everyone here is in danger. We need to find another way." The shadow seemed to hesitate, as if it were listening to our words. I felt an intense chill run down my spine, as if the very atmosphere were aware of the gravity of the situation. "What if the key to all of this is to undo the pact?" I suggested, trying to stay calm. "Maybe what we need to do is free the shadow, not control it." "And how do you plan to do that, Jake?" Ethan replied, incredulity in his voice. "Are you willing to sacrifice something? Someone?" Question hung in the air, and the silence became deafening. I looked at my sister, who seemed so vulnerable, but at the same time there was a strength in her gaze that intrigued me. "We can find another way. We don't have to sacrifice anyone." Then Clara, who had been on the sidelines until that moment, stepped forward. "Maybe I can help. My family has a connection to this cult, and I understand more than you imagine." The look she gave me was deep, almost painful. "If it's necessary, I offer myself. If the sacrifice of someone is what will free this shadow and, with that, save you in the town, I will be willing." "Clara, no," I shouted, feeling my heart race. "You can't do this. We don't know what will really happen. What if it doesn't work? If we do nothing, we'll all be lost," she replied, the determination in her voice echoing in our hearts. "I already carry this weight inside me. If there's a chance to end this, then I want it to be me." The tension rose again. Ethan seemed to hesitate. The shadow became more restless, as if reacting to our emotion. The environment was charged with an almost palpable energy. "Maybe you don't need to sacrifice yourself," Ethan said slowly, "but what if I do it instead? I am a descendant of the cult's founder." The impact of his words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "What? Ethan, you can't be serious." I am part of this story. If someone has to pay, let it be me. I can handle this." No, I shouted, desperation starting to take over me. "You can't just decide this. You don't know what you're doing." The shadow seemed to stir, its dark and threatening form twisting in the space between us, as if reflecting our despair. The ground trembled slightly, and I realized time was running out. "Ethan, please," I pleaded, trying to reach the reason that might still be inside him. "We need you. I need you." He looked at me, his eyes shining with an intensity I had never seen before. "We can't run anymore. It's this or the city. And I choose the city." The shadow, now stronger, seemed to feed on our emotion. "The only thing we can do is face this together," I said, a voice trembling. "But not like this. Not with sacrifices. We need to find another way to resolve this." The shadow was already acting, and I realized the true terror was just beginning. At that moment, among friends and family, the fate of everyone was about to be decided, and the only certainty I had was that the battle was far from over.